When did a medical bag reveal a trusted friend's quiet betrayal? I still remember the feeling of the medical waste disposal bag in my hand, heavy and oddly warm, like a secret heartbeat. It wasn't just the weight of the contents, sterile cotton swabs and used syringes, that made my palms sweat. It was the crushing burden of what that bag represented, a quiet horror building in our small town, and the chilling suspicion that someone I trusted, someone who swore an oath to protect, was actively making it worse. It always believed in doing the right thing, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. But this felt less like a hurt and more like a betrayal, a calculated knife twist in the very heart of the community I'd dedicated my life to serving. My name is Sarah Howard, 27F, and for the past 4 years, I'd been the sole nurse practitioner at the Willow Creek Community Clinic, practically holding the fort together in a town where the average age seemed to tick up a year every time the clock chimed noon. Willow Creek wasn't on any map you'd find in a tourist brochure. It was tucked away in a valley, surrounded by dense pine forests that smelled perpetually of damp earth and something vaguely metallic after a rainstorm. It had one stoplight, a general store that doubled as the post office, and a population that barely scraped past 1,000 souls. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew everyone's business, which usually made life easier. Until it didn't. Our clinic was tiny, just 3 examination rooms, a small lab, and a waiting area perpetually filled with the scent of disinfectant and old coffee. Dr. Leonard Vance, our town's beloved physician for 40 years, had finally retired last spring, leaving me effectively in charge, though Joan Lopez, 32F, the clinic manager, technically held the reins. Joan had been here even longer than I had, starting as a receptionist right out of high school. She knew every patient's medical history, their family tree, and probably what they had for dinner last Tuesday. She was quiet, almost painfully so sometimes, but incredibly efficient, and I'd always thought of her as the clinic's backbone. We'd worked well together, a quiet understanding forming between us through countless flu seasons and scraped knee emergencies. Or so I thought. The first hint that something was off wasn't a blaring siren or a dramatic revelation. It was subtle, like a persistent itch you couldn't quite place. It started with Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old firecracker with a penchant for brightly colored cardigans and a chronic cough. Her bronchitis, usually a seasonal nuisance, had flared up again, worse than usual. I prescribed her the standard antibiotic, a broad-spectrum one that had always done the trick. A week later, she was back, wheezing like a deflating balloon. Dr. Vance would never have let it get this bad, dear, she'd rasped, her eyes watering. I felt a familiar pang of inadequacy that often hit me when trying to fill Dr. Vance's giant shoes. I reviewed her chart. Nothing seemed amiss. I adjusted her medication, sent her home with nebulizer treatments, and told her to call if she didn't improve. She didn't call. Her daughter did 2 days later, frantic. Mrs. Gable was in the hospital in the next town over, Willow Creek not having one of its own. Pneumonia. Severe. It was concerning, but not unheard of. Elderly patients, weakened immune systems. I put it down to bad luck, a particularly aggressive strain of bacteria. Then came Mr. Henderson, a gruff but kind farmer with a persistent skin infection on his leg. We'd been treating it with topical creams and oral antibiotics for weeks. It would clear up, then return with a vengeance. He finally had to go to a specialist in the city who diagnosed it as a very aggressive, resistant staph infection. "These antibiotics you're giving him aren't touching it," the specialist nurse had said to me over the phone, a slight edge to her voice that made my ears burn. "They're just making it worse." I was meticulous. I prided myself on following protocols, staying updated on the latest guidelines. I checked our supply of medication, the expiration dates. Everything seemed fine. I even double-checked the patient charts, cross-referencing prescriptions with diagnoses. That's when I noticed it, a pattern, faint at first, then clearer, like developing a photographic negative. Over the past 2 months, there had been a noticeable increase in treatment failures, particularly with bacterial infections. Not just in the elderly, but across the board. Kids with ear infections not responding to amoxicillin. Adults with UTIs that required multiple rounds of different drugs. My gut, usually a reliable barometer for trouble, started to churn. I pulled up more patient charts, dozens of them. I started cross-referencing lot numbers on our current medication stock with the patient records. Our antibiotics, particularly the broad-spectrum ones we used most frequently, amoxicillin, azithromycin, cefalexin, seemed to be the culprits. They just weren't working. It was as if they were placebos. I mentioned my concerns to Joan one Tuesday morning, who was at her desk, meticulously updating patient insurance information, her brow furrowed in concentration. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, making the quiet of the clinic feel even more profound. "Joan," I began, trying to sound casual, "have you noticed anything odd about the recent infection cases? It feels like we're seeing an unusual number of treatment failures lately." She paused, her pen hovering over a form. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Odd? No, not really. Flu season's been pretty rough, Sarah. People are run down. Things take longer to clear up. But this is different," I pressed, trying to explain the pattern I was seeing. "It's specific to bacterial infections, and it's not just the elderly or immunocompromised. Healthy adults, kids. It's like the antibiotics just aren't doing anything." She shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture. "Medicine isn't an exact science, Sarah. People respond differently. Maybe you're just looking too closely." Went back to her forms, a clear sign the conversation was over. Her dismissive tone rankled me. Joan was usually so observant, so tuned into the clinic's pulse. It wasn't like her to brush off a clinical concern, especially one raised by me. My stubborn idealism, a trait Marie Howard, 51F, my aunt often lovingly chided me for, flared up. I couldn't just not look closely. Lives were at stake, or at the very least, patient well-being was severely compromised. Marie, my mother's older sister, was practically my second parent. She'd moved to Willow Creek after my parents passed away a decade ago, becoming the town's most enthusiastic, if not entirely successful, amateur potter. Her house, just a few blocks from the clinic, was a constant haven of warmth, slightly burnt coffee, and the earthy smell of clay. She understood my need to dig, to push, to make sure everything was right. At evening, over her notoriously lumpy lasagna, I told her about my growing unease. It's just, I can't shake this feeling, Aunt Marie. The numbers don't lie. Something's off with our medication. Marie, her hands still faintly stained with clay, listened patiently, nodding. Joan seems to be getting a lot of those medical supply deliveries lately, doesn't she? Those big trucks from the city. More than usual, I've noticed, when I'm walking past the clinic. Yeah, but that's her job, I said, stirring my lasagna around. She handles all the ordering, all the inventory. I know, honey, Marie said, her eyes twinkling. Just an observation. Maybe you should check the boxes when they come in. Make sure everything's correct. Her words, innocent as they were, planted a seed. Joan handled * all the ordering. The clinic's small budget meant we usually got our supplies from a lesser-known, slightly cheaper distributor. Our stock was reliable, but nothing fancy. Could the distributor be sending us faulty medication? It seemed unlikely, but not impossible. The next morning, I decided to do some proper detective work. I spent my lunch break in the supply closet, a cramped space overflowing with bandages, sterile gloves, and rows of neatly labeled medication. I pulled out boxes of antibiotics, checking lot numbers, expiration dates. Everything seemed legitimate. The packaging looked right, the labels were correct. But my gut still churned. I remembered a conversation from a few weeks back. Joan had been on the phone, her voice hushed, more hushed than usual. I'd been walking past her office, heading to the lab, and caught a snippet. Yes, they're fine. Nobody's noticed anything. Just make sure the next shipment arrives discreetly. I dismissed it at the time, thinking it was just Joan being her usual, private self, perhaps dealing with a particularly sensitive patient matter. Now it echoed in my mind, taking on a sinister resonance. Discreetly. Why would medical supplies need to arrive discreetly? A cold knot formed in my stomach. It was a leap, I knew, but my mind was connecting dots I desperately wished weren't there. What if the medications weren't faulty from the distributor? What if they were being asterisk switched? Sounded like something out of a bad movie, but Willow Creek was a small town, not Maybury. People had secrets. People made bad choices. My first thought went to the recent budget cuts. The town council, always strapped for cash, had slashed our clinic's already meager funding. Joan had been furious, muttering about having to make do with less and getting creative. Could this be creative? No, it was too dark, too dangerous. I decided to try a different approach. I pulled up the distributor's information we used. I called them, pretending to be confirming a recent order. The woman on the phone was friendly, helpful. She confirmed our last order, the types of antibiotics, the quantities, even the lot numbers. Everything matched what I had in our inventory. But then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned something that sent a shiver down my spine. Oh, and we're sending out that special request you put in for the educational samples later this week. You wanted those shipped to a different address, correct? My heart slammed against my ribs. Educational samples? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. I'm not sure what you're referring to. We didn't place an order for educational samples. There was a pause on the other end, a slight hesitation. My apologies, ma'am. It was placed under the clinic's account, but with specific instructions to deliver to a residential address, a Ms. Lopez, I believe. They were for a community health initiative. The line went dead in my hand. I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen, my own face pale and a little wild-eyed. Joan, a residential address, educational samples. The phrase was a familiar euphemism in the pharmaceutical world for inactive placebos or medications being tested. But why would Joan be ordering them? And why to her home? And why would she lie about it? My hands trembled as I typed Joan Lopez into the clinic's internal record system. I knew her home address, of course. It was just a few blocks from the clinic, a modest little house with a perpetually overgrown rose bush in the front yard. A house I'd been to for clinic potlucks and Joan's annual Christmas cookie exchange. A dizzying array of possibilities rushed through my mind, each one worse than the last. Was she selling the good medication on the side, buying cheaper, possibly ineffective, or even harmful alternatives and substituting them into our stock? Was she involved in some kind of black market scheme? The idea was so out of character for the quiet, diligent Joan I knew. But what else could it be? The pieces, once scattered, were starting to snap together with terrifying precision. The hushed phone call, the subtle dismissiveness, the discreet deliveries. I thought of Mrs. Gable, wheezing in her hospital bed. Mr. Henderson, his leg inflamed. The countless children I had sent home, assurances on my lips with medications that were, if my suspicions were correct, doing nothing but delaying real treatment. A wave of nausea washed over me. Sarah Howard, the stubborn idealist who always wanted to do right by people, might have unknowingly been complicit in something truly awful. I couldn't confront Joan without proof, not without more than a gut feeling and a snippet of a phone call. I needed to see those educational samples for myself. I needed to know what they truly were. I needed to find a way to get into Joan's house, not just to snoop, but to protect my patients. The idea felt abhorrent, a gross invasion of privacy, but the alternative was allowing this insidious medical crisis to continue unchecked. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and righteous fury. I knew with absolute certainty that this was bigger than me, bigger than the clinic. And I knew just as certainly that my life in Willow Creek was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The next medical supply delivery was due Friday afternoon. I had less than 2 days to figure out how to get my hands on it and what I would do once I did. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and righteous fury. I knew with absolute certainty that this was bigger than me, bigger than the clinic. I knew just as certainly that my life in Willow Creek was about to get a whole lot more complicated. The next medical supply delivery was due Friday afternoon. I had less than 2 days to figure out how to get my hands on it and what I would do once I did. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic mental plotting. I considered every scenario, from outright confrontation to alerting authorities, but each felt premature, too drastic without concrete proof. My stubborn idealism warred with a newfound pragmatism. I couldn't risk Joan destroying evidence or disappearing. I needed to see those boxes. I needed an undeniable link. Marie, bless her practical heart, unknowingly provided the key. She called me Thursday morning, her voice laced with concern. "Sarah, honey, I was just walking past Joan's house, and her roses look positively ravaged. Something's eating them. Joan's so particular about those roses. Maybe we should go over later, offer to help? She might appreciate it." A jolt went through me. Joan's roses. They were her pride and joy, a splash of vibrant color in her otherwise unassuming yard. This was it. A perfect, innocent excuse to be on her property. "That's a great idea, Aunt Marie," I said, trying to sound genuinely interested in horticulture. "Let's do it Friday afternoon. I'm free after my last patient." My plan began to solidify, shaky but tangible. I'd arrive with Marie, feign concern for the roses, and subtly keep an eye out for the delivery truck. If it arrived, I'd have to figure out a way to get a glimpse inside those boxes. It felt dirty, like betraying a friend, but the images of Mrs. Gable and Mr. Henderson flashed in my mind, hardening my resolve. Friday afternoon dawned clear and deceptively peaceful. My last patient left at 3:30, and I practically sprinted to Marie's house. It was already armed with gardening gloves, a trowel, and a small spray bottle of organic pest repellent. "Ready for some detective work, dear?" she asked, her eyes twinkling knowingly as if she sensed my true mission, though I'd kept the educational samples detailed to myself. Marie had a knack for seeing through my attempts at nonchalance. We walked the few blocks to Joan's house. Sure enough, a large, nondescript white van, the kind typically used for parcel deliveries, was parked in her driveway. Men were carefully unloading several large cardboard boxes, clearly marked with medical supply labels, and carrying them towards Joan's side door, which led directly into her small attached garage. My heart lurched. This was it. Joan was there directing them, her face pale and drawn. She looked tired, almost haunted. She caught sight of us. Her eyes widened, a flicker of something unreadable: fear, guilt, crossing her face before she quickly masked it with a tight smile. "Sarah, Marie, what a surprise," she called, her voice a little too bright. "Joan, honey, Marie noticed your beautiful roses looking a bit sad," Marie announced, striding forward with her gardening tools. "We thought we'd come lend a hand. What's all this, dear? Big delivery today?" Joan hesitated, glancing at the boxes being carried into her garage. "Oh, just extra supplies for the clinic. Getting a head start on next quarter's orders. Bulk discount, you know." Her explanation felt thin, too rehearsed. "And the roses. Well, that's so sweet of you, but I'm just about done here. Maybe another time?" She seemed anxious, eager for us to leave. One of the delivery men struggled with a particularly large box, nearly dropping it. As he adjusted his grip, the top flap, which hadn't been fully sealed, gaped open for a split second. My eyes, scanning for any detail, caught a glimpse. Not vials of clear liquid or neatly packed pills, but small, almost clinical-looking devices. Something that looked like a nebulizer. And then the unmistakable flash of an instruction manual cover. "Generic nebulizer kit training model." My mind spun. Training models? Not placebos, not switched medication. But still medical supplies delivered to her home, still discreetly, still lied about. What did it mean? I felt a sudden, sharp twist of confusion. This wasn't what I expected. The sabotage was real, but the method, and therefore Joan's motive, was still completely obscured. "Oh, nonsense, Joan," Marie said, already bending over the rosebush inspecting the leaves. "It'll just take a minute. Sarah, you can help me on this side." She gave me a look that said, "Play along asterisk." Joan, flustered, could hardly refuse. She stood by the garage door, watching the last box disappear inside, then pulled the door shut, locking it with a click that sounded unnaturally loud. She came to join us, picking idly at a wilting rose. Her unease was palpable. "So what kind of supplies are those, Joan?" I asked, trying to sound genuinely curious rather than accusatory. "They look like training kits," Joan flinched. She swallowed hard, her gaze darting away. "Oh, those, yes, we're looking into some new patient education programs. For respiratory conditions, diabetes. The kits are just samples for me to review, to see if they're suitable." Her voice was tight, her explanation flimsy. Idea of Joan, the quiet, meticulous administrator, suddenly spearheading patient education programs that required home delivery of training models, felt ludicrous. Our clinic barely had enough budget for basic supplies. We stayed for another 10 minutes, Marie meticulously spraying the roses, me making small talk with Joan, whose answers grew increasingly vague and evasive. It was clear she wanted us gone. When we finally left, Joan practically herded us off her property. Walking back, I relayed the training model detail to Marie. She frowned. "Well, that's peculiar. Why wouldn't they go to the clinic? And why would she be so cagey about it?" "Exactly," I said, a new, even more perplexing puzzle forming. My initial theories of black market dealings or selling good meds for profit felt less likely now. But if not that, then what? And how did this connect to the ineffective antibiotics? The training models be related to some new experimental treatment she was pushing, one that interfered with standard antibiotics? It felt like grasping at straws. The next few days were excruciating. I continued to see patients whose infections refused to yield to treatment. The constant worry gnawed at me. I kept replaying Joan's hushed phone call, her dismissive shrug, the discreet deliveries, the training models. What was she hiding? Then, another unexpected twist. Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Henderson's wife, called the clinic distraught. Her husband was back in the city hospital, his staph infection aggressively flaring. "The doctor's there," she sobbed. "They're saying he's not getting the right medication, Sarah. They're asking about his records, what exactly he was prescribed here." My blood ran cold. The specialist nurse had hinted at it before, but now it was a direct accusation. Hospital would demand his full medical records, including drug orders, lot numbers, everything. And if there was a discrepancy, if what we were supposed to be giving him was different from what he actually received, the truth would come out. And I was the prescribing practitioner. This wasn't just about Joan anymore. My license, my career was on the line. That evening, unable to sleep, I pulled up Mr. Henderson's chart again. My eyes scanned the detailed notes, the prescription logs. Everything looked correct, everything matched our official stock. Then, almost by accident, my mouse hovered over a tiny, almost imperceptible icon in the corner of his digital chart, a small, grayed-out flag that I'd never noticed before. Curious, I clicked on it. A hidden field popped up, a drop-down menu, usually used for internal notes or special patient alerts. This one was titled, Alternative Treatment Protocol. Beneath it, a single, horrifying entry. Substituted generic batch, QL19B patient advised of new protocol and agreed to experimental treatment. It was dated the same day his first ineffective antibiotic prescription was entered. My heart hammered against my ribs. Substituted generic batch. QL19B, I searched our inventory system for QL19B. Nothing. It wasn't a lot number from our standard distributor. It wasn't anything official. The crucial detail, patient advised of new protocol and agreed to experimental treatment. That was a lie. I had been the one to prescribe his medication, and I had never advised him of any experimental treatment. I had given him standard antibiotics, believing them to be effective. Joan must have accessed the system, input this hidden code, and then substituted the medication herself after I'd prescribed it. The nausea from before returned, stronger this time. This wasn't just about money or bad choices. This was about a horrifying, unethical experiment carried out without my knowledge, without patient consent, using our clinic as a front. An asterisk was listed as the prescribing physician. Joan wasn't just sabotaging the clinic's reputation. She was putting patients' lives at risk and implicating me directly. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't breathe. I called Marie. It's past midnight, but I knew she'd answer. Aunt Marie, I whispered, my voice hoarse, I know what Joan's doing, and it's worse than I ever imagined. I laid it all out for her. The hidden field, the substituted generic batch, the implications for Mr. Henderson and all the other patients. Marie listened, her silence a heavy weight on the other end of the line. When I finished, she sighed. Sarah, she said softly, this is serious. You can't handle this alone. We need to talk to Joan. Together. Not a fear tightened in my chest. Confronting Joan, knowing the depth of her deception, felt terrifying. But Marie was right. I couldn't let this continue. My stubborn idealist core demanded action. 2 days later, Sunday morning, Marie and I walked to Joan's house. I had spent the night before reviewing every patient chart with persistent infections, finding the same hidden alternative treatment protocol field, the same fake substituted generic batch codes. It was systemic. It was widespread. It was an appalling breach of trust. Joan answered the door, her face a mask of weary politeness. She seemed to know why we were there. Her eyes, usually so sharp and observant, looked dull, defeated. Sarah, Marie, come in. She led us to her small, sparsely furnished living room. The air was thick with unspoken tension. Joan, I began, my voice trembling despite my resolve, we need to talk about the alternative treatment protocol you've been using. I watched her face carefully. Flicker of panic, then resignation. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice flat, but her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Don't lie, Joan, Marie interjected, her tone firm but not unkind. Sarah found the hidden entries in the patient charts, the substituted generic batches. We know about the deliveries to your house, the training models that aren't training models. This is about Mr. Henderson, about Mrs. Gable. It's about every patient in Willow Creek. Joan sank onto her worn sofa, her shoulders slumping. She stared at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she took a shaky breath. It's not what you think, she whispered. Then tell us what it is, I urged, my voice tight with barely suppressed anger and hurt. Because right now, it looks like you've been deliberately giving our patients ineffective medication, putting their lives at risk, and implicating me in the process. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a sudden, unexpected fury. Implicating asterisk you? You think I asterisk wanted this? You think I'm some kind of monster, Sarah? The pain in her voice was raw, surprising me. Do you have any idea what it's like to run that clinic? To watch it bleed money, to see every budget cut chip away at what little we have, to know that soon, Willow Creek won't even have a functioning clinic. She sprang up, pacing the small room, her words tumbling out, laced with bitterness and desperation. When Dr. Vance left, the town council basically told me to keep things running on a shoestring. They cut funding again and again. Our medical supply costs were astronomical. We couldn't afford the quality medications we needed. People were going without or not getting the best treatment because we just didn't have the funds. She stopped, facing us, her eyes pleading. Then I got an offer from a research company. They needed a small, isolated community, a clinic with limited oversight to test some new alternative treatments. Specifically, they were developing cheaper synthetic versions of common antibiotics. They paid us, Sarah, a lot of money. Enough to keep the clinic afloat, to keep our equipment running, to pay our staff. Enough to ensure Willow Creek still had some healthcare, even if it wasn't ideal. Told me the alternative treatments were harmless. Placebos at first, just to test patient compliance. Then, they started sending what they called bioequivalents, slightly different chemical structures that were supposed to have the same effect as the real antibiotics, but cheaper to produce. They said it was for the greater good, a way to make medicine affordable for underserved communities. Her voice cracked. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. Thought I was saving the clinic, saving healthcare for Willow Creek. And the educational samples? Marie asked, her voice quiet. Those are the bioequivalents, Joan admitted, her gaze falling. They wanted them delivered discreetly so as not to alert our official distributors or other clinics. They said they were still in the testing phase, not approved for general distribution. The training models were just a cover story, a way for me to explain the frequent deliveries if anyone asked. She wrung her hands. I know it was wrong, I know, but I felt like I had no choice. It was this or watch the clinic crumble. Watch our patients lose access to care altogether. Her explanation, though horrifying, painted a picture of a woman driven by a desperate, misguided attempt to do good. She wasn't malicious, but she was deeply, dangerously flawed in her approach. The reluctant leader pushed to a breaking point, making an unthinkable bargain. "Joan," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "they weren't bioequivalents, were they? They weren't harmless. People got worse. Mr. Henderson is in the hospital. Mrs. Gable got pneumonia. These weren't just alternative treatments. They were ineffective or worse." A single tear tracked down Joan's cheek. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I saw the patterns too after a while. I tried to tell them, the research company, they just sent more money. That it was typical initial side effects or patient variability. They wouldn't listen. I got trapped." She looked up, her eyes desolate. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do." My anger, though still present, began to morph into something else, a profound sadness for Joan and for the impossible position she had felt trapped in. I saw my own stubborn idealism reflected, twisted and distorted in her desperate decisions. She, like me, wanted to do right by the town, but her path had veered into unethical territory, driven by fear and lack of resources. I realized my own assumption that she was motivated by pure malice had been a dangerous oversimplification. I hadn't truly seen her struggle, hadn't pressed her enough, hadn't sought to understand the systemic pressures on her as clinic manager. My tunnel vision on protocol and rightness had blinded me to the real, complex reasons behind her actions. "Joan," I said, my voice softer, "this has to stop. We have to tell the truth. To the town council, to the patients, to the authorities. We have to recall all the questionable medication, and we need to get real effective antibiotics back into the clinic no matter what it costs." She recoiled, fear clouding her eyes. "Tell the truth, Sarah, they'll shut us down, they'll sue me, they'll sue you, I'll lose everything. The clinic will be gone forever. And what about the people who are suffering?" Marie interjected, stepping forward. "What about the trust you've broken? The Hippocratic Oath, Joan? This research company, they don't care about Willow Creek. They care about their bottom line. We have to expose them, and we have to fix this." The conversation was difficult, stretching into hours. Joan was terrified, heartbroken, racked with guilt. She confessed everything. The exact figures from the research company, the specific batches of ineffective medication, the protocols for substitution she had been instructed to follow. She finally broke down, sobbing, admitting she hadn't slept properly in months. It became clear that she was a victim of a predatory system as much as she was its enabler. A reluctance to lead, as Marie described her, had manifested in a desperate attempt to protect the clinic by any means necessary, even if it meant sacrificing her own integrity and the well-being of the community. My initial perception of her as simply efficient and quiet had blinded me to her underlying anxieties and the immense pressure she was under. The path forward was daunting. First, we had to stop the influx of the fake medication. Joan, with trembling hands, called the research company and informed them she was terminating the agreement, effective immediately. They threatened legal action, but Joan, emboldened by our presence, held her ground. She then contacted our legitimate distributor, placing a massive, urgent order for verified antibiotics, drafted a protocol for reviewing every single patient chart, cross-referencing diagnoses with the substituted generic batch codes, and preparing to reach out to every affected individual. Over the next few weeks, the clinic was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. We worked tirelessly, Joan and I, side by side, sorting through the backlog, identifying patients, and making the difficult calls. Marie, ever the rock, organized a community meeting, gently preparing the town for what was coming. When we finally stood before the town council, Joan, though still pale and visibly shaken, delivered a courageous, unvarnished account of her actions, the financial pressures, and the predatory research company. I presented the detailed medical data, the proof of the ineffective treatments, and the resulting patient harm. Marie spoke passionately about the need for transparent, ethical healthcare in their small town. The reaction was mixed. There was shock, anger, disappointment. Patients felt betrayed. Others expressed understanding for Joan's impossible position. The town council, initially furious, eventually agreed to allocate emergency funds to restock the clinic with proper medication and to support the immediate retreatment of affected patients. They launched an investigation into the research company, promising to pursue legal action. Joan offered her resignation. "I can't continue," she said to the council, her voice devoid of emotion. "I broke your trust. I broke my own trust." But an unexpected wave of support rose from the community. Not everyone, of course, but many patients, especially those who had known Joan for years, argued for leniency. She kept the clinic open. Councilman, Mrs. Gable's daughter, now fully recovered, argued fiercely. "She made a terrible mistake trying to do good. We need her." A surprising turn, the council voted to put Joan on probation, under strict oversight, conditional on her full cooperation with the investigation and a commitment to new, transparent inventory practices. It was a second chance, born of Willow Creek's innate sense of community and a recognition of the desperate circumstances that had led to her choices. A month had passed since Joan's confession. The clinic hummed with a different kind of energy. Initial wave of frantic retreatments had subsided. We had new, verified medication on the shelves. Joan, though quieter than ever, was meticulously restructuring the inventory system, implementing checks and balances, and actively participating in the investigation against the research company. She was no longer just the efficient administrator. She was a leader, albeit a humbled one, taking responsibility and actively working to rebuild trust. My perception of Joan had shifted profoundly. I still carried the hurt of her deception, but it was tempered by an understanding of her motivations and the immense pressure she had been under. I saw her not as a villain, but as a complex human being, flawed and desperate, who had made terrible choices for what she genuinely believed was the right reason. My own idealism, once a rigid compass, had gained a nuanced understanding of shades of gray. I learned that doing the right thing was often far more complicated than simply following rules, especially when systemic failures pushed people to the edge. I also acknowledged my own role, however unwitting, in the situation. Had I pushed harder for solutions to the clinic's financial woes? Had I recognized the signs of Joan's struggle earlier? My focus on my clinical duties had made me oblivious to the administrative pressures that had driven Joan to such desperate measures. Path to full recovery, both for the patients and for the clinic's reputation, would be long. Trust, once broken, heals slowly. But Willow Creek, true to its resilient nature, was beginning the process. We were still a small town, nestled in the valley, still surrounded by dense pine forests. But now we carried the scars of a crisis, a hard-won lesson in the complexities of good intentions, difficult choices, and the profound importance of transparency. My life in Willow Creek was still complicated, but it was also, finally, moving towards something resembling healing, one difficult conversation at a time.